Hello, Richard from BudgetKeyboardist.com. I was born in 1965 and I grew up listening to Genesis, Rush, The Cars, Steely Dan, Howard Jones, Thomas Dolby, Alan Parsons, David Bowie, UFO, and a zillion other bands I can name. Now, when I listen to top 40 music today, I hear a lot of 80s influence. And because I love the 80s and I love learning, I figured I could pick up some tips and ideas from today's hits and share them with you. So I picked 6 songs from the top 40, and I analyzed them from the perspective of a keyboard player. What types of keyboards and synth parts were they using? This is a short video, it's not a deep dive, but I thought you might find this interesting. Now, because I don't want any copyright strikes, I'm not going to play you samples from these songs, but I will play some plugins that sound similar to those being used in the hits. And that way, if I say M1 house piano, for example, if someone doesn't know what that means, I can give them a similar example. Abracadabra by Lady Gaga. I found this song interesting. I didn't exactly like it, but I had some neat ideas. All right, so what about synths? I definitely heard a vocoder. A vocoder was used almost like a pad. And then I also heard some traditional pads, which are pretty common in lots of songs. At one point, I definitely heard a squelchy 303 bass part. And there was also an M1 piano type sound, and that reminded me of a zillion house songs. So the synths in this track were definitely there to make the track more interesting, and the 303 and the M1 house piano were very intentionally retro to give the song a cool vibe. Manchild by Sabrina Carpenter. I found this song to be stupid. I realize I'm not the target audience, but I really thought this song was as dumb as anything I'd heard in years. All right, that aside, what about the synths? This is not a complex arrangement. I heard some pizzicato cello samples, which I thought sounded pretty interesting, and also some string samples. Unless they were real strings. Honestly, I can't tell. Two Hands by Tate McRae. I kind of like this song. I mean, again, not the most complex arrangement, but, you know, the synths were used for pads, and there was like a sine wave type bass synth sound, which gave this song a really substantial low end. So we had bass synth and pads. Pretty conventional stuff, honestly. Cry for Me by The Weeknd. When you say The Weeknd, I automatically think the 80s. And so this song used your typical cool 80s synth sounds. I mean, we got 808 drums, which uses analog synthesis to make drum sounds. We got sort of a buzzy synth bass. We got a keyboard sound using what I would call kind of like toned down sawtooth waves, kind of like piano meets clav kind of roll, almost like a JD800 kind of thing. And then there's some chimes in there that sounded like they were inspired by a DX7 or maybe a Roland D50. Man I Need by Olivia Dean. I really like this song, and I really like the synth usage. This song used a brass patch that sounds very much like a Yamaha CS80. Very cool. It also uses a piano, specifically either an upright or a spinet. It could be a real piano, or, it could be sampled. And finally, we get to the biggest name in the music business right now, The Fate of Ophelia by Taylor Swift. All right, this music isn't for me, but there were some very interesting melodies in this song, and the production is the best that money can buy. For synths, I heard a Mini Moog style bass synth and a Jupiter 8 style sawtooth keyboard. I'm sure that there's lots more than that going on in this song, but those are the two things that jumped out at me. Okay, what I found really interesting is that a lot of synth sounds I heard were derivatives of classic synth sounds like the CS80 brass, but they were all subtle. It was kind of hard to hear exactly what was going on, unlike the synths in, say, Jump or Take On Me. In those two hits from the 80s, the sounds of the synths were half the point of the song. Like, they were really important because they were brand new sounds at the time. Modern pop is using similar sounds, but they're used to serve the song a lot more. Everything sounds more subtle. Now, part of this is because everybody's using Soothe to push down any spiky frequencies, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. I think it's interesting. I mean, those synth sounds were new 40 years ago, but now they're just the sounds that everybody uses. Emphasizing them will definitely make the music sound more like the 80s, like the Weeknd does, and honestly what I do intentionally in my own music. Synths started being used widespread in pop music back in the 70s. They've been used ever since. So what's that, like over 50 years of popular synth use? When people say they're bored of the same old synth sounds or they want to push the boundaries, I think that does a great disservice to how usable things like pads and synth basses still are. I mean, at this point, the sounds you hear in modern music are songwriting staples. So a Mini Moog bass line is a lot like drums and piano. They're just staples. They're everywhere. There are thousands of small variations in the Mini Moog style bass sound. But at the end of the day, it's still about the part itself. Is the bass line musical? Does the bass line serve the song? In modern music, the answer is almost always yes and yes. I expected to hear 6 crappy songs. I actually heard 5 pretty good songs and 1 crappy song. And synths are still being used for bass tracks and for pads and to add color and fill out the sound. I think my big takeaway is that modern synths aren't that much different from 80s synths, but the sounds have kind of been toned down a bunch in order to best serve the song. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at modern pop music and how it uses synthesizers and the examples I gave. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But don't you go changing. And I've been Richard, and you've been watching, and I really appreciate it. And I will see you again next time.